Evolution MX offers a number of ways of being able to deal with query handling and approval of invoices through the invoice register within both the purchase ledger and the subcontractors. Using a dashboard approach to display the information within the invoice register and what needs to be done, I can access a particular entry, pull up its details, and in this occasion, I may be unclear as to what to do with the actual posting. So I can see the details that I've already entered there for the supplier and the values, but I'm unsure of what the job number is. So I could put in a little note to say, I'm not sure what job number that is. And then rather than just saving it and coming back to it later, what I can do is use the place on query function, which will allow me to have those notes pass over to somebody else to deal with the query that I'm looking for the answers for. And now this could be yourself, so there's no reason why you don't put things on query for yourself. It'll just mark it as you being the person that's actioning it, and you'll be able to come back to it later. But what you can do here is select anybody else that you want to send the query to. Now, these don't necessarily have to be active users of your Evolution MX system. I'll just mark it as myself. As I say, they don't have to be a user who's going to access Evolution MX. They could just be in receipt of an email that's going to prompt them for the answers you're looking for. So if I just pass that one into query, that will disappear off my to-do list because I've asked that to filter and only show those that have got no status. But it hasn't got rid of it. It's now reporting on it through a different tile on my dashboard, the query list. So I can always check on it and see, okay, that's the one I did the query with. I can see that it's got some information that may be missing on there. So I'll be able to deal with that in a second. Now, as I say, that can be placed on query in one of two ways. It could be that the user is actually a user of Evolution MX. So going into the approval menu, we'll be able to see all of those entries that have been passed through to that particular user. So there's the item in query here at the moment, and it may be that that user is able to just put a little note on it to assist you with the posting of it. So if I put that note into it, they can then approve. And assuming that that is the answer that they're able to furnish you with, they can close the query. If they're not sure, or maybe somebody else can help, they could pass it over to somebody else. But if we say, okay, that will deal with the query within inside Evolution MX, and that's then come back to you as the administrator back on your to-do list, along with the notes that were added. Okay, so you can now pick it up and then you can allocate it to that particular job. Now, as I say, that person doesn't necessarily have to be a user of Evolution MX. And what would happen in that instance is they would receive an email. So coming through the system, something like this would appear where they're being asked for the job number, and attached to that email will be a copy of that document. So that's just an image of the document from the invoice register. They would then be able to reply to that email with the answer of the query, and that would again come back to the administrator, the person that sent the query item out in the first place. And then they would be able to pick it up through the unprocessed list and take it off query and put in the missing details. So that's the on query function. Evolution MX also offers a workflow option for the approval of invoices. This is used where the information is known in terms of the accuracy of the invoice received and how it needs to be costed or matched, but it needs approval by somebody before it passes to the ledger, or at least certainly before it gets paid. So to action something like this, we would be able to pick up an item from the invoice register. On this particular occasion, I've been able to, as the administrator, input some of the details in relation to the invoice, but we can see that we've got a slight discrepancy there between the content of the invoice and the content of the order. I go into my show cost allocation, where the purchase order on this occasion has been matched. We'll be able to see there is actually a discrepancy of £15 in relation to the delivery charges, which weren't included on the order. Now, it may be that on this particular occasion, you are able to update the costing, so you can add that information to the invoice analysis in terms of indicating the contract number and the cost head. So that's maintained the accuracy of the invoice. That now all matches, but now rather than pass it straight through to the ledger or use the query function, what I can do instead is I can use the workflow. Now, workflow is a configurable option available to you. It allows you to be able to pick up on whatever workflow rules you've set. They may be for individuals or they may be for a particular process. So if I were to select a particular option from there, and if I submit, that ordinarily would be the posting through to the ledger. Now, on this occasion, what it's done is it's paused it, because rather than submitting it to the ledger, it's submitted it to workflow. So that item now has been recognized as being on the system. It doesn't necessarily have to be on the ledger. This is where you've got a choice. There's a system option that can be set that governs whether items in workflow do appear on the costings from the moment they enter workflow, or whether that only happens on completion of the workflow or the approval. Now, the mechanics of how the authorizer would receive that can be the same as we saw within the onQuery function, in as much that they can access the system as an approval user, be able to see the content of the invoice. They could put sticky notes onto it just to say what they agree or disagree with. They have the option of approving or rejecting it. The difference here is that when they do approve it, it doesn't go back to the administrator. It passes now through the rest of the system and will update the ledger if it hadn't already done so. It doesn't come back or stay within the invoice register because it's satisfied the required approval or workflow rules that were set. Now, as I mentioned earlier, there is an option for workflow to be handled by somebody who's not going to access Evolution MX on a regular basis. Obviously, if they do, they can then go through and action several different approvals all in one go. Their preference, though, may be that they are going to receive an email. So similar to how we saw with the onQuery, they can have an email with whatever description was put into the notes, and attached to that could be a copy of the invoice. And it can be just a process whereby they could reply to that email with the word approve, and it would automatically approve the invoice. And that's where they don't need to be coming in and out of Evolution MX. They're just actioning it all from email. Now, the workflow options that you've got available to you can be quite comprehensive. So we have a look at some of the settings we've got here. The option that I just used, the one I call Tom, has got a requirement for a particular user to be actioning that. They've got an approval limit of 50,000. It is optional, so I can select it as and when I need to, but I don't have to observe the workflow. And it is also going to send an email. Okay, now, workflows can be more complex than that. They can be multi-level. So in the example here that I've got PL, for example, it's saying on that particular entry that the user entering this has got a threshold themselves of 2,000. So anything below that won't be troubled for workflow. This is also going to instigate an automatic workflow. So there's no need to necessarily select this one. It's not optional. So it will apply in situations where the approval is required. So anything below 2,000 will pass through without the requirement for workflow. This particular user can approve up to 5,000. They are on stage 1, which means as and when that stage has been passed, then it will pass on to stage 2, where this is a different user needs to step in. And this may be a single user, it may be a group of users, and you can set the options to say whether just one of the people receiving it needs to approve it at that level or whether they all do. The other thing to note with the approval is there is the option for proxy, which means that can deal with holiday coverage or where somebody needs to step in on behalf of somebody else. So in this situation, I've got the user MRW is proxy for the user KW, and they are there to do that indefinitely, but it may be just for a temporary or a holiday cover, as I say. So workflow as an option can be selected at the point of input. It can just be defaulted to a rules base whereby maybe the values need to have approval. It could even be set to recognize the contract that's relevant on the particular invoice and then automatically direct it to the appropriate QS or contract manager. So there's quite a lot can be done with the workflow. The difference between that and the query is that once the workflow has been approved or signed off, it doesn't come back to the administrator. It just passes on through the system, updating the ledgers. Okay, and as I said before, there is an option as to whether the costing or the ledger updates are updated at the point of entry into workflow or only when workflow is completed. So that's some options you've got available to you with the invoice register on both suppliers and subcontractors for the query handling and approval of invoices.